Hi, this is Kumar Singh from Designed Analytics LLC, and you're watching another episode of Tuesday Trivia. Well, the question that we are going to answer in this week's Tuesday Trivia is around this topic, as in the ability of CEOs to take risk, or how much risk exactly can a CEO take, and how do you actually mitigate or manage this risk versus reward thing, right, in a realistic way. So I think the question that we are going to discuss is, what is the best way to minimize risk when you are trying to build AI capabilities, right? And there is no yes or no answer to this. Generally, if you know from my past episodes, I provide a yes and or no answer, and then I justify that answer in the episode. But today's episode, because of the nature of the question, we will not be basically answering with a yes or no, but rather than get into some kind of discussion. Now, at the high level, you can kind of throw a lot of abstract jargon, right? The kind that you hear and read all the time. Okay, this is a risk management framework, for example, and then you can create a risk reward matrix and all. But all that theory is good, but it doesn't actually work when it comes to real world AI capability and implementation, and we will discuss why, and then we will get into the capability, which is the only and the most important one for you to have, to build, to find somewhere. Whichever way you want to actually acquire this capability, that will help you develop an AI roadmap that will be realistic, and you will end up eventually developing the capabilities that you want, right? Now, if you think about any risk management framework, right, you have basic common sense steps like prepare, right? Prepare, then categorize, right, plan, things like that. Obviously, they are very relevant steps, right? You need to go through those steps. But the gist of success and failure does not actually depend on following these steps. That's where we should not get rigid with processes and frameworks, as I have been saying for many, many years. Now, think about this from a different perspective. What would be considered a risky bet on AI? Like, if there are two CEOs, one has a approach where they want to go big. They have this grand vision of enterprise AI, and they basically want to develop that. Say 5 years from now, they want to have that vision, and they start working in that direction, right? It's a risk. It's a big risk, right? You have this grand vision and you are working towards that, and you start working for that big vision in a big way, right? You start a portfolio of many, say hundreds of projects, and all those projects should or will, in your vision, eventually merge into that one single cohesive end-to-end enterprise AI capability. That many will actually label that as a risky bet. How about a CEO that wants to start small, test things, right? They're starting with smaller projects, right? But is that not risky, right? Unless they have an end goal or a vision in mind where all these small projects, even if they are doing, which would not be a good thing to do, but even if they are basically working on one project at a time, is that a good thing to do, right? Because if you are trying one project after the other, you eventually have to get somewhere. All these projects have to lead somewhere, right? Because AI capabilities, you cannot build them like some other legacy applications or enterprise tools where you implement the tool and it takes care of the entire function. They have to be built currently the way AI capabilities are, to kind of form a cohesive view, right? So what is the gist here? In both the risky, so-called risky bet and non-risky bet, where do you think the success criteria lies? Right? The first one, where the CEO has a grand vision of where they want to be 5 years from now, and they start the big portfolio, The success or failure depends on what? The final vision, right? If within few years you figure out that the final vision was not actually practical or is outdated, then what it does is that it kind of makes all the effort that you have made towards that vision redundant, right? Big risk, right? You will say it's a big risk because this person started hundreds of projects, right? So if you do a cost analysis, the magnitude of cost might be high, right? Within that 5-year time frame. Now let's look at the other scenario where the CEO or CTO or whoever has decided to start small, right? But if they do not have that vision, right? They start small, they are basically implementing projects, but eventually few years from now they'll find out that what they actually want to build when they have clarity, right? When they believe they have clarity, what they want to build will not be supported by the work that they have done. Now you will say, but the risk is minimal because they were working on one project at a time. So as compared to our first scenario where the organization has worked on 100 projects and then it doesn't align with the vision or the vision is not practical, in this scenario they have worked on like one project at a time. So they have only a handful of projects that they have worked on. But the challenge here, the challenge in this scenario is that even though that may seem like a short-term thing, as in like a short-term gain or risk minimization in the short term in 5 years, the point is you have to attain those capabilities at some point of time. You have to build those AI capabilities. No matter how much you read naysayers and try to convince yourself that AI is a bubble and AI is not going to be a big thing, it is. I mean, you have to think about AI not from only the new AI lens of Gen AI, but the other old AI and the actual AI capability, not the machine learning aspects and all, right? So it's not going anywhere. You have to catch up, right? So if after a few projects you fail, you start that catch up thing again, right? You again start one project at a time and you get into that loop where eventually you have two risks. You will never be able to catch up and you still end up working on numerous projects, right? And what is a bigger risk, right? If you are an organization with a resource, what is a bigger risk? Not being able to catch up, getting disrupted and eventually like get into some serious challenges, or maybe starting with a plethora of projects, right? And in that case, if you have the vision, your chances of being successful are more. Now, in this one project at a time approach, right? If you have a vision, right? And if you understand how all these incremental projects eventually will get to that vision, the end state, then this project definitely has less risk. And in the first one, which was more risky, where you start with a big bang with multiple projects, there also the risk can be minimized only if you have a robust end state vision. So I guess at this point, you can already see what is the common theme or the most important aspect. Everything, every other framework that you have, you can toss it out. Actually, I can create 10 different risk reward frameworks, risk mitigation process, different steps in the risk mitigation process. There are 100 different templates or maybe thousands. None of that will work when we are talking about AI, which is a rapidly evolving technology, because the end state vision is the most important thing. So then the question is, and the question that we initially had transforms into, what is the best way to build a end state vision, say where we want to be 5 years from now, so that whatever work we do actually ends up translating into something meaningful, contributing towards the end state vision. And that, my friend, is the real risk mitigation. So then my question, kind of new question, is how can we create a vision that actually ends up being a reality? So take a step back again, because we will reformulate that question again. But for now, if we dissect this, the answer to this question is, what are some of the things that can actually go wrong, right? In all probability, right, there are only two key things. Within those, there can be many reasons, but first is that by the time you reach that 5-year mark, the world of technology has changed so much that the capabilities that you have been building, right, to attain that objective, the 5-year end state objective, they have become redundant because new technologies have come into play, right? That's always the risk. In fact, there were many companies 6-7 years ago who were working on developing some form of self-service analytics using third-party solutions. Actually, even if they do not admit, have kind of, they should be seeing themselves in a state of redundancy, because those same capabilities can now be actually implemented in a much better way using both the old and the new AI, right? So that's one aspect, right? You keep on working with all those projects, right, and making sure that they are relevant as the technology progresses, so that they can all come together to still build that final state, right? So one way it can fail is that you become redundant. The capabilities that you are creating, they become redundant in 5 years. The other way is that the capabilities that you have been building do not exactly tie with the final vision in the most cohesive way. The second part, where the capabilities you have been building do not tie in the more cohesive way, can happen when you are doing one project at a time, right? So if you remember, we started with two options that a CEO can take: the big bang and the one project, like smaller incremental steps. The smaller incremental steps are challenging because when you do one project at a time, you generally will not be able to understand what's the big picture impact. So it's always kind of, my suggestion would be to start big with multiple portfolio of projects, the first approach, right? Irrespective of these two aspects, right, you will say that the challenge still remains the end state vision. What's the capability that can allow us to generate that end state vision in the most optimal way? And this is the final question. So you see how we started with a high level question, kept on drilling, and we come to the final question, as in, what capability do we need to have to ensure that we minimize the risk, right? Because that was the initial question. By building the ability to create a enterprise AI vision 5 years from now that will actually remain viable 5 years from now, irrespective of advances and changes in technology, right? That is the question. And the answer to that is having the capability to understand how technology is currently evolving, how it has evolved in the past, and how it will evolve going forward. While this may seem vague, if you think about this, if you look at all the job descriptions out there, even for leading companies, even for companies that actually are in the field of AI, right? One interesting thing that I do is to kind of look at the strategies, announcements, and look at the job descriptions of companies and try to find out how much aligned they are, right? Or in case, like, even if there is no announcement, no key strategy directions, news or anything, I still look at the job descriptions to see where they are going, what are the key areas that they think they need to be focusing on. You will see a lot of focus on building, right, which is important. But for technology companies and non-technology companies alike, it's important also to understand how their own technology, and for external companies, companies that use those technologies, it's important for them to understand how those technologies have evolved so far and how they will be evolving in the future. And if you can either hire for that capability, build that intuition, right, you have a superpower that can actually ensure that any technology initiative, and more specifically AI, which is a rapidly evolving technology, will have minimal risk, because it's almost like knowing the future, right? but it's more abstract than that, because you are not actually predicting that an event is going to happen. You just have a sense of where things will be 5 years from now, so that whatever you build, right, whatever you build over next few years towards a final state vision does not go redundant, but kind of tags with, not only with each other, right, but with any other new advances in technologies that happen along the way. So as you can imagine, if you have this capability, the best approach then is to go with the big bang approach, because you know that your risks are minimal. You can start with a big portfolio of projects that will eventually merge to our end state, and you know that that end state will still be viable, will not be outdated, and any new technologies that come into play will actually gel cohesively with that. Well, I hope you liked it and found it useful. I'll see you again on Thursday.